Alright folks, welcome to Chapter 8, User Interfaces. Alright, there's the objectives, and more objectives, and even more objectives. Alright, so what is the user experience? The user interface is often called the presentation layer. Now, I have no idea who says that because I have never heard it called that anywhere. And the experience must be entertaining. Well, that's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, who makes a game that's not fun or entertaining? So anyway, the outputs, these are the visual and the audio elements that we see in the game. And the inputs are our control elements. How do I control the game? Is it a gamepad? Is it a keyboard and mouse? And that's very important because the keyboard and mouse are much more accurate than a gamepad. There was a game that released, actually it might have even been 10 years ago now. It was called Shadowrun Online or something like that, and it was for the consoles and the PC. And both these players played on the same server. And within a month, almost no console players were on the servers because they were getting owned by all the PC players because the PC players with keyboard and mouse were so much more accurate than they were. So that's why we don't see games that typically share genres between the PC and the console. Alright, the player-centric interface design. Now we're referring to the UI, the user interface. And players are typically, at this point in our gaming lives, we're kind of used to certain things. It's like when Microsoft came out with Windows 7 and took away the start button. Everybody was like, what? How can you train us for 20 years to use the start button and then take it away? It's the same thing in video games. It makes us uncomfortable. So close your eyes for a minute and think about playing a game. And don't think about a specific game, but you're designing a game. Where are you going to put the hit points, your player's health? Well, typically we put that on the top left of the screen or the bottom left, right there a little bit to the left from the center. And where are you going to put the enemy's health? Well, we typically put that on the top middle of the screen. And when I open my bag, where does my bag open? Or my inventory, where does that open? Typically it's on the right side of the screen. So that's what we prefer. We prefer, a familiar interface. Something where we don't have to relearn, how to make the wheel. Which is where Microsoft went bad with Windows 7, 8, and blah, that kind of stuff. So your interface should be consistent. When they go between levels or something else, the interface should always be the same. In some games, like you can drive a vehicle, or you can run around on the planet, or you can fly in a plane, or you can take off in a spaceship. But all the UI should be consistent no matter what you're doing. And you should be able to give good feedback to the player. The player should know, what his health is. The player should know how much stuff he has in his inventory. The player should be able to see, what spells or abilities he has available to them. All right, and you don't want to take control from the player. There are some games where you just hit like a button 1, 2, or 3, and then all of the stuff kind of happens independent of you. And then the bad guy, let's say it's like a turn-based game. So I hit 1, and then my player does this, and then the enemy player does this. So I don't really have a lot of interaction in that. All right, limit the number of steps required to do things. If you've ever played EVE Online, they made it possible to mine planets, and so they called this planetary interaction. And their first implementation of planetary interaction was so hard and mind-numbingly boring that a lot of people, after trying it out, just said, I'm not doing this. The big joke online was, I'm wearing out my mouse because I got to click so many times just to set this planet up to mine. So you want to limit the number of steps. And then when appropriate, allow the player to reverse their action. You want to minimize physical stress. There can be times when the player is stressed and he's popping the mouse button, but you don't want to have that for more than a few seconds at a time. You also don't want to have the player have to move his eyes all over the screen to get the information he needs to do something, especially like in the middle of a fight. I don't want to look left to find my health and look to the right to find the enemy's health, and then look to the top of the screen for what action I'm going to do, and then look for the bottom to see if it hit or that kind of stuff. Alright, so again, if you want to see an example of complicated, you can grab this YouTube video. It's only 7 minutes long, but it's a tutorial on planetary interaction in EVE Online. And this is their revised version that has less clicks and less stuff involved in it. And it's pretty complicated. Alright, the player-centric interface design, you got to tell the player what they need to know. Are you winning the fight or are you failing the fight? You need to be able to watch as the fight's occurring, and that way maybe you can decide to run away if if it's going badly for you. When a player can do a combo, maybe that combo ability should light up to kind of grab the player's attention. So we're trying to tell the player what to do next, but we're still allowing the player to kind of decide what he wants to do. And that kind of goes along the lines of offering the actions that the player can perform. We want to light up combo buttons. When there are objects in the game that they can interact with, we want to make them have a glow or a shine or something like that so they can see that. We want to allow them to have be able to pause the action or save the game, when they need to. Now, obviously, in online games, you can't really pause the action, but in a single-player game, you should at any time you should be able to hit escape and pause the game and talk to somebody who came in the room or pick up your phone, something like that. In console games, they tend to not allow that. They tend to have like certain save points that you have to get to, which kind of obviously helps them to code games faster and get them out the door faster, but it takes away. If I'm halfway through a zone and all of a sudden somebody comes over and I got to go talk to them, then I'm like, oh, now I got to go do that all over again next time I play. And people kind of get tired of that over time. All right, so the design process. Define the gameplay mode first. What's my gameplay going to be? And then after that's defined, then okay, now what kind of visual elements do I want? If my gameplay is going to be a 2D platformer, then I can think about, all right, what are the platforms going to look like? What are the obstacles going to look like? All right, and then they tell you to define a different user interface for each play mode. And again, it all depends on what you're doing. Most games, the successful games, the interface is very similar depending on where you're going. So if I'm walking or running or in a vehicle or in a ship, the interface is still the same. I always know where my health is because it's always in the same place. I always know how to fire the button or how to shoot because I can just press the mouse button. Now they mentioned that you should work on the UI mode and make a prototype. So without any coding background, there's a program called Pencil. So if you look for Pencil software, something like that, that's actually a free to download program that actually allows you to design user interfaces for your iPhone or your Android phone. And you can resize buttons and move them left and right, and you can kind of see how things look on the screen. And that way you can kind of design the interface before you actually have to even start coding the product. It helps to have a clear understanding of what you're trying to do. When we talk about things, you may say something and I may take it in a totally different way. You may say, I need the button here, and I think that you need the button a lot bigger than you wanted it. But if you use some kind of program like PowerPoint, Flash, Photoshop, or Pencil, and you actually design your thing and then show that to me, there's no way I can make a mistake because you showed me, relative to the screen, this is how big the button needs to be, and this is where it needs to be positioned. So we would all be on the same sheet of music. Remember, when you're managing others, especially once you do the game design thing and you kind of move up the ladder, eventually you're going to be managing a team, and you need to be very clear, about the things that you want done. When you tell the team this is what I want done, there can be no questions. You need to make sure it's in stone. Hey, this is what I want. So here's what a model is. Here's how I'd like it to go. Because if you just say, give me 3 buttons, put them near the bottom, that kind of stuff, you're going to get 3 different designs, from 3 different people. One person may give you 3 buttons on top of each other. One person may give you 3 buttons, horizontally. So again, you have to be specific. All right, then so choose that screen layout. Obviously, you don't want to take away from the user's view, so you want to make sure that they have plenty of view screen so they can see, where they're going, who they're fighting, things like that. And the rest of their information should all be along the side. But similar information should be closer to each other, and that's why they typically put the player's health on the top left and the enemy's health on the top middle, because you can see them both really with just one eye movement. And the best game UIs actually even allow you to resize them so that people that have a hard time seeing can make the UI, like the health bar even bigger, and then people that have smaller monitors can make them smaller, or that people have better eyesight. So decide what the player needs to know, and then provide that information. If I am doing a shooter game, I need to know how much ammo is in my clip. How much health do I have left? How many med packs do I have left? Do I have any grenades? If I'm playing a racing game, how much gas do I have left? What's the status of my tires? That kind of stuff. So make sure the user is getting all the information they need to play the game. Alright, and then let the player do what she wants to do. Create visual and audio feedback for actions. There's a game I'm playing now called Arcade, and whenever you get an email, there's like a little ding, so I know that there's an email without even have to look at something. So a lot of times it doesn't have to be visual. Audio feedback is great too. All right, and then the rest of the stuff is kind of self-explanatory. Alright, shell menus. Remember, shell menus allow the player to start, configure the game. At any point in the game, the player should be able to hit escape, which pauses the game, and then a menu comes up. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about MMOs. You can't pause World of Warcraft and stop the other, 8 million people from playing, while you set up your graphic settings. But on your typical game, your iPhone game, that kind of stuff, you'll typically have a menu, and you should be able to hit escape and pause the action. But you don't want your menus too confusing. You should have 3 main menus, settings, exit the game, things like that. And then when I go under settings, then they should give me, okay, do I want video settings? Do I want audio settings? Do I want player control settings? That kind of stuff. Just make sure your menus don't get too complicated and go too deep. If I have to hit settings, then I have to hit audio, then I have to hit another setting, and then I have to hit another setting, and I have to drill down 5 different times to get to the setting that I want, that's not user-friendly. To get to any setting that you want, typically you don't want to have to drill down more than 3 times. Alright then, typically the first several games that you make, and actually you're probably your first maybe even 5 years in the gaming industry, you want to create simple, non-complex kind of games. If you look at a game like Super Meat Boy, the most complicated thing was the maps and how they laid them out so that you had to kind of figure out how to go from one point to another. There were no super enemies to fight. There were no weather things that you had to fight. That kind of stuff. It was just get from this point to this point and figure out how. So once the designer had figured out the movement of the little piece of meat, and then had decided on the spinning axe blade, at that point everything was done in the game. They just had to make all the different levels, and they made some really good levels and focused on that for over a year. And because they had some good levels and they had so many levels, that was one of the big selling points of that game that allowed it to sell over 1 million copies. So simple and easier games sell just as well as the more complicated games. Think about Angry Birds. Think about Minecraft. Minecraft is an incredibly simple game. I just click on a block and the block disappears and goes in my inventory. Angry Birds made a boatload just off the other crap that they were selling. And then look how many versions of that there were. So with depth, they're saying like a deep interface places commands in multi-level menus or dialog boxes, and you typically don't want to have to drill down and get into 5 different boxes in order to get to where you want. So a broad interface offers more options, and then maybe I can just scroll down. So maybe I hit settings, audio, and then I just scroll down in the audio settings and find what I need because all the audio settings are right there. If I have to go down to 5 different settings, like man, where the heck is this? Because I probably stopped at at the setting 3 or the 4 or whatever and just looked for something. I still can't find it. Alright, and then there's always the good old-fashioned context-sensitive interface where I can just right-click on something and it gives me information. So if I see a grenade in my inventory, I can right-click on it and it'll say, hey, this is a grenade. If you throw it, it'll blow up and cause this much damage. And make sure when you throw it that you throw it within 3 seconds because otherwise it'll blow up in your face. So you want to avoid obscurity. Don't sacrifice function for looks. And then the biggest thing, you need to test the UI on someone outside your project. And as you go, you want to test it on new and different people. You don't want to just keep testing with your family. Hey, check this out, check this out. Your family's always going to tell you that you're doing wonderful. And your friends will usually support you too. So that's why it's kind of important to find somebody new. If you're at school, maybe there are some people in the class that you could let them test it out. If you're at home, I don't know, find somebody. There's a lot of forums and stuff where you can share different things with people and they'll give you opinions on it. Especially video game forums. Just make sure though, if you share your thing with somebody on a forum or whatever, just make sure that you're covered so they can't steal your idea or steal your code and then pop it out into a game and kind of beat you to the punch. Alright, so interaction modes. So obviously, I can be an avatar and my player can interact, with the world. I could do multi-present, where I can be many places at once. Party-based, basically you control a group of people. Think about Fallout, that kind of thing. And then contestant, player acts like he's on a game show. And desktop, obviously the screen is similar to your PC desktop. There was a game that had come out years ago that basically it copied your desktop and made all your icons or your icons movable objects. And then like this little pinball would kind of like float around and hit your objects. There was like a little dog or something that would come on the screen and eat your icons and do different things. But it was actually kind of just a little interactive kind of game screensaver thing. That was kind of cool, but it was kind of neat. Alright, and then you got to think about your camera modes or your camera angles. Do you want first person? Do you want third person? Where do you want the camera to be in respect to the player? And then, if it's a 3D game, that's great, but, good 2D is preferable to bad 3D. There are some first-person shooters out there that don't allow you to go into first-person mode. You're always in third person, looking at your character, over his shoulder. And without crosshairs, it's a lot harder to aim like that. So the average user in online shooter games, tends to like first-person. So here's a game in Unity, and Unity is a kind of a game maker. And I can take the camera and decide where to move it, and you can kind of see. I don't know if you can see here because it's going to be kind of hard, especially with the YouTube video. Where you can kind of see what the game looks like depending on where I position the camera. So if I position it up here and then I hit play, all I see is the first level of the ground, and I kind of lose the ground as I'm jumping. But if I position the camera down lower and then I play, I can kind of see a lot more of the game, and I never kind of lose the ground even when I'm jumping. So even just the camera angle or the position of the camera is very important, even in a 2D game. Alright, then it gives you some, the first person. First person is kind of nice because you don't have to worry about animating the avatar a whole bunch. All you have to do is show me a gun in my hand, and that's it. And the gun kind of moves a little bit as my hand kind of moves up and down as I'm running. But you don't have to do the avatar, and you don't have to give me different outfits for my avatar and work on animation for all that different stuff, because all you have to show me is the gun. And then it's a lot easier to see what's in front of me. If I see an object that's glowing, it's a lot easier for me to find it, especially if it's on the ground in front of me. So first person is typically the way to go, for shooter games and things like that. If you're doing any kind of 3D game, you typically want to give the user a choice between third and first person, and that way you don't eliminate potential players. Alright, then, remember, third person, I back the camera up, and now I'm looking at my avatar over the shoulder, so now I have to have a bunch of different animations for my character. So when you're thinking third person, think World of Warcraft or a game like that, where basically all I do is I stare at my character's butt as he's running. Alright, and then there's aerial perspectives, and sometimes they typically refer to that as isometric. If you ever played any of the Doom, or not Doom, it's Doom, duh. If you ever played any of the Diablo games, that would be an isometric view or a top-down. Alright, and then if you're making a 2D game, there are different perspectives for 2D. I could have the whole 2D world in a single world, or a single screen. Or I could have a side-scrolling game, kind of like the one I just showed you. Or maybe I scroll up to the top, I start at the bottom, and I kind of work my way up. So lots of different ways you can build a game. Alright, then some other things to think about. The visual elements. Should I have windowed views? Do I need to, kind of have an overlay where I can see through things? When a text box pops up on the screen, is that going to cover up everything that it's on top of, or should it be, semi-transparent so people kind of still see the kind of things going on behind it? Should the interface be semi-transparent? Should I be able to see through things to kind of have a better idea of what's going on my entire screen? And then some other ideas for the UI, even if it's just your health. Do I give them digits? Do I give a needle gauge? Do I do a power bar? Do I have multiple small little bars? Do I have colored lights, icons, text? All kinds of different ways you can do things differently. I can use different colors, that kind of stuff. Alright, and then how am I going to show my character? When I click C to see my character, am I going to see a portrait? Am I going to see a whole picture of him? If I change the gear on my character, does it change the gear in the UI when I hit character, to kind of so does my portrait change? In a lot of games it doesn't, because again, that's a lot of extra coding that you'd have to add. And really, how many characters care? When they hit the C button, I just want to equip my armor and then get back to the game. I don't really care what my avatar looks like in that picture. I care about what my avatar looks like in the game. So, as an indie developer, do I need to spend time on that part? I don't know. All right, and then anytime you're making text for the game, they say to make localization easier. And what is localization? Well, that's when I change the game from one language to another location. ArcAge, and there's a couple others that the games are created in Korea, and then they're brought over to the U.S. and then they're localized. So all the Korean text is taken out, and we put English in there. And when the characters speak, we remove the Korean speech and we add our audio files. Just make sure that whatever typeface that you come up with, or your font or your format for any text on the screen stuff, it should match. If it's a fantasy game, they should have some kind of cool fantasy font. You don't want to use Times New Roman for a game like that. And then if you're doing like a sci-fi kind of game, you want to have a cool, sci-fi spacey kind of cool font. All right, and then other important things that most people don't typically focus on are the audio elements. The audio elements go a great way to kind of tell us what goes on in a game. Like last week we talked about how Naruto uses probably the same 5 different audio tracks. There's a lovey-dovey one, there's one for super action, there's one for a fight's about to start, that kind of stuff. So that by the time you hit to the 50th episode, just by the music that's playing what's happening in the game. Like I can go to the bathroom, or I'm sorry, in the show, I can go to the bathroom and know exactly what's going on in the show because I can hear the sound. So do I want to put vibration? When there's an earthquake, do I want to activate the vibrating gamepad or stuff like that? Is the screen going to shake? And then, background noises. Do I hear birds? Do I hear crickets? That kind of stuff. Obviously, music's a big piece. Your voiceovers don't want to be repetitive. Skyrim got made fun of a lot because every time you walked into the main city, the one guard, his audio track was screwed up, and he said the same thing. I wish we used to adventure until I took an arrow to the knee, and that's where that arrow to the knee on the internet was like for like a year. Everywhere you looked, that's all you saw was I took an arrow to the knee, that kind of stuff. So obviously, your first couple games, you got to kind of make do with what you got until you earn enough money. So work on something simple, a mobile game, just a $1 or $2 game to sell on Steam, things like that. You can kind of do the voice work kind of yourself, or have your family and friends kind of be involved in doing some of the voice work. But then as you progress, you want to get better and better writers and voiceover people. All right, and then input devices. We have like iPads now that have 3-dimensional input. They have accelerometers, and we have GPSs. I can shake my iPad and it knows like to do this, and if I rotate my iPad, it knows to do that. We have 2-dimensional input devices like joysticks and directional pads and trackballs. And yes, sadly, there are some people that prefer a trackball over a mouse. And then we have 1-dimensional inputs like controller buttons and keys. So whatever your target is, your target market, make sure you're designing for that. All right, then along with input devices, how is he going to navigate? Is it screen-oriented steering? So I move things in orientation to the screen. So if I push the joystick upward to the top of the screen, my avatar moves that way. He moves up. Is it avatar-oriented, where if I push the thing up, I move in the direction I'm facing? And then flying, if I'm flying, now I need 2 mechanisms because I need up and down, left and right, forward and back. And then still, your game may just do point and click. Like in Diablo, you don't really use the keys other than like for the camera. You just click everywhere you want to go, so it's just point and click. But then you've got to kind of develop a pathfinding algorithm in your game to make sure that your character gets from point A to point B. So it all comes down to what you prefer. Some people are better at scripting, player controllers, and I'll let you move your own player because it's easier for me to script. Other people are like, I can make a pathfinding algorithm a lot easier than I can make a player control algorithm, so I'll just do that. So just make sure whatever you do, you allow for customization. Everybody doesn't like the same thing. So some people should make a short character, some people a tall character, some people prefer to play a man, some people prefer to play a female, that kind of stuff. I should be able to remap my keys. There are a lot of, especially online players, that don't look at their keys when they're playing. Or when I say don't look at the keys, what I mean is I don't look at the screen and then use my mouse to click on an ability. I map all my abilities to my keys, and I can move my hand around and do the abilities that I need, so I don't have to take my eyes off my enemy to click where I need to click. So my mouse isn't tied up on my action bar at the bottom. I'm using my mouse to change camera and move around, and I'm using my hands to do my abilities. So I need the ability to reassign my keys. And then make sure that the game allows customization, on per player. Like with the Nintendo, I can create a me, and then anybody can have a me over at my house. And then when I play, all my stats go on my me. So it's kind of cool, because then I don't have to worry about my son screwing up my score or my statistics. Alright, and that kind of wraps up this chapter. But before I go, I want to show you a couple things. Just even because a lot of people are like, "Oh, you're giving us examples of 2D games. 2D games don't sell. 2D games are blah." That was way back in 20 years ago. So let me show you some stuff real quick. All right, the first one is Terraria. Most of you guys have heard about this. After Minecraft came out, years later, Terraria came out, and it was just a 2D game. You kind of dug and you made blocks and you kind of built stuff. But as of January 2014, it sold over 2.5 million copies. So now Terraria sold for $20, I think, at first, or maybe even 25. So if they only made $5 per copy, that would be $12.5 million. But then they released it on several different platforms, the console and the Xbox, and now they're at the point where they've sold over 12 million copies. And this is all within the last, 5-6 years. All right, and if you look at Steam, you'll find another game called Starbound. Again, another 2D game. 1 million after the first month on Steam Early Access. As of January 2008, it's still listed as Early Access, but 91% of 43,000 reviews are positive. How many games actually have 43,000 reviews? And especially with 91% of those being positive. And again, this was another $20 game, and it sold 1 million copies. Now, if Steam takes their standard 30%, they would get $6 a copy. So that means that these guys made $13 million in the first month of releasing their game. Alright, and then there's another game called Edge of Space. There's another Signs of Life. And Kria. These are all games that, and WindForge, that are in early access on Steam because they're not ready to release yet, but they're getting ready to. So here you have 4 2D games that are ready to be released because the sales are so strong of 2D. And then when you look at this, you're like, oh, well, how hard can it actually be to make a game like this? Especially like Terraria. All you're making is these little sprite guys. And again, they just, they have bend points where the sprite moves and it kind of does the animation. Once you've done animation in 2D a few times, it's like, holy crap, this is easy. And then you think about, well, how do I make this game world? How do I make the bottom stuff? Well, products like Unity and Unreal have engines that actually will generate that for you. Here's a quick video. I'm going to play just a little bit of it. Now I have no idea where he got this music from, but he's in Unity and he's designing the game world. So it automatically had it generate random, and now he's making changes to it. Alright, but you get the idea. So 2D games are relatively easy to make, and they're still selling like hotcakes. So that about wraps it up. If you're going to make a new game, I always suggest 2D as your first video game because it's relatively easy. They sell okay, and it's a great place to get your feet wet and to kind of learn the tools that are out there. Alright, other than that, if you have any questions, make sure you bring them up or send me an email. Other than that, have a great week, folks.